Climate change, then a changing climate. Climate change is the climate crisis. Climate change.
But the debate is settled. Climate change
The only
is a
constant
fact.
is change. That's true about life, and it's true about the climate. The climate has been constantly changing since the Earth was formed 4.6 billion years ago. For example, in just the past 2,000 years, we have seen the Roman warm period, when it was warmer than today. Then came the cooler Dark Ages, followed by the medieval warm period, when it was at least as warm as today. Then we had the Little Ice Age that drove the Vikings out of Greenland, and most recently, a gradual 300-year warming to the present day. That's a lot of changes, and of course, not one of them was caused by humans. During the past 400,000 years, there have been 4 major periods of glaciation, meaning that vast sheets of ice covered a good part of the globe, interrupted by brief interglacial periods. We are in one of those periods right now. This is all part of the Pleistocene Ice Age, which began in earnest 2.5 million years ago. It's still going on, which means that we are still living in an ice age. That's the reason there's so much ice at the poles. 30 million years ago, the Earth had no ice on it at all. So then what about carbon dioxide, the great villain of the global warming alarmists? Where does that fit into this picture? Not as neatly as you might think. Temperatures and carbon dioxide levels do not show a strong correlation. In fact, over very long time spans, periods of hundreds of millions of years, they are often completely out of sync with one another. Over and over again, within virtually any time frame, we find the climate changing, for reasons we do not fully understand. But we do know there are many more factors in play than simply the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Factors such as the shape and size of the Earth's elliptical orbit around the Sun, activity from the Sun, and the amount of wobble or tilt in the Earth's axis, among many others. Even the relatively short 300-year period from the peak of the Little Ice Age to the present has not been steady. The latest trend has been a warming one, but it began nearly a century before there were significant carbon dioxide emissions from burning fossil fuels. And there has been no significant warming trend in the 21st century. Contrary to media headlines, the trend over the past couple of decades has been essentially flat. Meanwhile, human-caused CO2 emissions are higher than ever. About 25% of all the CO2 emissions from human sources have occurred during this period of no net warming. So what are we in for next? Will the temperature resume an upward trend? Will it remain flat for a lengthy period? Or will it begin to drop? No one knows, not even the biggest, fastest computers. All the information I've presented, the increases, decreases, and plateaus in temperature over the ages and into the last centuries, is available to anyone who wants to seek it out. Yet to state these simple facts is to risk being called a climate change denier. Not only is that absurd, it's mean-spirited. It's absurd because no one, not even the most fervent skeptic, denies that the climate is changing. And it's mean-spirited because to call someone a climate change denier is to intentionally link them to people who deny the Holocaust. So maybe it's time to stop the name-calling. Predicting the climate, one of the most complex systems on Earth, with thousands of inputs, many of which we don't understand, isn't an exact science or anything close to it. Maybe it's just a tad arrogant to suggest that we can predict the weather or the climate or just about anything 60 years from now. The science is not settled. The debate is not over. The climate is always changing, it always has, and it always will. I'm Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace, for
wonder,
Prager
when you see
University.
the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
Well, that's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party position. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming. Why? Because those are the ones the government pays for, and that's where the money is. It's real simple, but that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't make it true. That only makes it bought and paid for. The money goes in circles.
Across the northern hemisphere in 2013 and early 2014, we have seen record low temperatures. Some of them the coldest temperatures ever recorded in the last 300 years since thermometers were invented. The Great Lakes entirely froze over. The Arctic and Antarctic, in their respective winters, saw record growth in the ice. But what does Al Gore and CNN and MSNBC and the UN and the BBC do? They show you weather satellites from the poles during the summers and show the ice shrinking, as it's always done for thousands of years with the northern and southern passages that were even documented in the time of the Vikings. They lie to people and say that penguins cannot swim in the Antarctic, and that in the Arctic, polar bears are dying, even though National Geographic has to admit polar bear numbers are up fivefold since the 1950s and are now invading areas not previously known to be in their range. But that doesn't matter. Obama said you could keep your doctor. Then he said he never said you could keep your doctor.
If you've got health care already, then you can keep your plan if you are satisfied with it.
If you like the plan you have, you can keep it.
I intend to keep this promise. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan.
You like your plan and your doctor, you can keep them.
He said it wouldn't raise your premium, even though it did. So why not tell you that polar bears can't swim? Why not tell school kids they're all going to die if we don't pay Al Gore and the UN trillions of dollars in carbon taxes? Well, now because they're losing the debate, and it's been shown in the UN's own numbers that since the mid-90s, the Earth's temperature has actually dropped slightly, that there are natural cycles, they can't deal with those facts. So all over British and European news, but also here in the U.S., we've seen professors and others come out and call for the arrest of people that question anthropogenic or man-made global warming. And the latest is in the Times of London. With a straight face, one of the biggest papers in England, talks about ministers and the committee in Parliament calling for people to not be allowed, including members of government, to question the, quote, consensus that man-made global warming is not man-made. Well, there is no consensus. In fact, the facade of the consensus is collapsing. The consensus is forming that the only thing that's steady is change itself. If you want to see the article, the headline is "Crackdown Ordered on Climate Change Skeptics." That sounds like something out of the old Soviet Union. Then we segue into Al Gore and his new move to produce a Inconvenient Truth Part 2 with new lies for old. Bottom line, we have an authoritarian movement on the so-called left that is seeking to not just tax every form of human activity and track it, but to also silence anyone that would dare challenge it. These people are not liberals. They are out of control authoritarians. But I wanted to reach out to some of the mainline supporters of this who really mean well, and I want to discuss some of the real environmental threats to this planet. Open-air genetic engineering of plants for pharmacological crops, where viruses and bacteria are mixed into the genetic code of mainline staple food crops that then infect the entire family of, say, corn or canola, has been proven in major studies to cross the genetic line into animals and humans that eat it, damaging our DNA. We know that toxic waste dumping is a serious problem. We know that overfishing in many areas is a serious issue. We know that the development of superbugs because of the overuse of antibiotics is threatening not just human life, but much of animal life on this planet. But when you enter into the equation Earth changes and giant asteroids, a 2-mile across nickel asteroid would be estimated to be the equivalent of thousands of Hiroshimas or Nagasaki's. And that's something that humans don't have control over. That's something that paying a tax to Al Gore will not fix. Then you enter volcanic and seismic activity. Huge earthquakes from Chile to off the coast of Japan in the last few weeks, as well as California, as the Pacific Rim heats up. But government scientists tell us, don't worry, in the geological record, big events like this only happen every few 100,000 years, and we don't think we're due. They have no idea on the real geological line how often these events really happen. But what we know is many civilizations have been destroyed or damaged by them. We know the world is hit by huge earthquakes and tsunamis on a routine basis, causing tens of thousands to die every single year. But because these are threats that the government can't even pretend to control, they tell us it's no big deal, it's not an issue. I go back to this all the time. Honeybees kill more than 200 people a year in the U.S. alone, more than international terrorism combined. But we're not seeing Homeland Security checkpoints out on the road to stop honeybees because it's something that we know is just a risk in the environment inherently, just like earthquakes, just like tsunamis. What do you do to mitigate against earthquakes and tsunamis? You don't live in those zones, or you live in a home that is designed to mitigate the danger from living in those zones. The truth is, the greatest danger historically is government. In the 20th century, according to the University of Hawaii, 262 million innocents, non-military personnel, were killed by government, were executed, were murdered, in many cases raped and tortured before they were killed. Statistically, it's not earthquakes, it's not asteroids, it's not flesh-eating bacteria, it's not cigarettes, it's not firearms, it's not honeybees, it's not great white sharks that are the danger that kill 5 people a year, but everybody's scared of them. No, ladies and gentlemen, it's government taken over by out-of-control criminal interest. And when governments start trying to say, we're not going to let you be pro-Second Amendment, or we're not going to let you promote your views on climate and the fact that the earth is always going through changes, we're going to shut you up. We're not going to let television have you on as guests. That's what they're proposing. You know you're dealing with the real threat that has reared its head throughout history. It's called despotism, it's called oppression, it's called tyranny. And across the world, it's on the march. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, to quote Sir Isaac Newton. And there is a response, a sleeping giant of free humanity that is awakening and beginning to move against the tyranny. The future, the destiny of civilization and freedom is in your hands.